Minnesota, the legendary Stevie Wonder is coming to Target Center. Join him for an unforgettable night of soul, funk, and timeless hits on Sunday, October 27th. Tickets are on sale now. Get the full details at KFAN.com. Keyword calendar.
Party on, final hour, 9 to noon, Nordowin for PA. Covered the Vikings at great detail. It was a good conversation that I was able to have yesterday as we changed topics. I enjoyed having PJ Fleck on following Saturday night's 24-17 Gophers victory over the visiting Trojans in studio now. He's covered this team for a very, very long time, courtesy of GopherIllustrated.com. And you can follow him at Ryan Burns, MN, via X. It is Ryan Burns. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you joining me, and I appreciate this book. See, Lavelle went down to his vehicle.
That thing's nifty, man.
And came back.
Super nifty. Where can you get it again?
I'm excited to read it. Well, you can the trunk of his car is the first one, but Barnes & Noble locations and book signings. He's going to be at the Bloomington Armory.
And local bookstores as well, right, Lavelle?
Local
right.
bookstore. And so,
Amazon.
And Amazon, yes. And Amazon as well. Thanks, Lavelle. See you later, brother. How about that win on Saturday night?
How about them Gophers, huh? How about them Gophers being able to figure out a way to overcome the Trojans where, I know we were talking just before we came out on the air. College football's in an interesting spot.
It's in a weird
right now.
place.
Well, there's like 4 really good teams, and then everybody else can be beaten on any given week. And that's where last Saturday night at Huntington Bank Stadium, your Gophers finally played their most complete 60 minutes of the season, and they were rewarded with a top 12 victory.
What do you think about Miller Moss now that you've seen him in person?
I think that I think he's a talented kid, but I'd say one of the things I took away from that win, and nothing to take away from Minnesota, was Lincoln Riley has such an infatuation with throwing the football that it literally cost him the football game.
You think it did?
Well, you look at the stats, and the stats don't lie, and that's where they can tell you whatever story that you want to look for, but the 2 Trojan tailbacks run for over 7 yards a carry.
Right.
And their inability, so they get in a 3rd and 4 spot in that fourth quarter. It's 3rd and 4, you're at the Minnesota 35. You're thinking, okay, this is probably going to be, I would say, 4th down territory if you get into it. You're running the ball exponentially well. What does he do? Goes drop back pass, tries to throw a slot fade. Minnesota's best pass rusher, Ja Joyner, gets a hand on him. Interception, game flips on its head. Offense goes down, gets their touchdown, tie game.
Yep.
1st and 10. You think, okay, Lincoln Riley, he's learned his lesson. He's going to run the football. They're running it well. Drops back to pass. Ja Joyner forces a intentional grounding. 2nd and 25. That whole drive goes pear-shaped. And then Minnesota goes down, gets their touchdown, and then it's very fascinating to see. As much as it is about Miller Moss, and I think he's a talented kid. I don't think he's Caleb Williams, but he's a very talented quarterback. Lincoln Riley continuing to fall in love with the pass. When you're running the ball as well as you are, especially in the Big Ten, Lincoln Riley, you got to go with your tailbacks.
And Woody Marks, by the way, good player, stands out. The whole thing.
Outstanding college football name, by the way, Woody Marks.
Woody Marks is sweet. Mm-hmm. So I felt like this was a victory over USC. It's a helmet school. It's an institution. We talked about it a bit yesterday.
Something you haven't done in 50 years. Yeah.
But, okay, I'll say this, though. You've played USC 9 times in a century.
Correct.
So it's like, well, we haven't beaten them since
Context
1955.
is important.
I get it. 9 times in a century. Mm-hmm. So this isn't exactly like this bloodthirsty rivalry. It's not like getting the axe for the first time in 20 years or anything like that. But part of that, it felt like they're, you mentioned context and how important this win is or isn't. You're going to see USC a lot more moving forward now. They're in the Big Ten. But what was kind of striking, and you mentioned the running the ball thing, is that USC, the image of that team that I had coming in was different than ultimately what I saw on Saturday night. So in some ways, I'm building up like the idea, the emotional element of beating USC is a little more fantastic than the practical element of, at this stage, I think they just played a better football game. in a lot of respects. And Darius got loose for the first time. And you mentioned Ja Joyner. Let's Ja Joyner for a second. He was awesome on Saturday night. And I know and I mentioned this with PJ yesterday. And Guardsy was the one that really pointed it out to me. So I'll give him credit for noticing this.
We don't have to give that guy any credit.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
No credit to JG. You'll hear him actually, the coach's show coming up at noon. So a lot of maroon and gold in your near future here on your home for Gophers football, the fan. But kind of the hidden stats, right? Like you mentioned that he forced a pick earlier in the game, and then he forced that intentional grounding. But he didn't get to Miller Moss, right? I think he had a sack in the game or was credited with one. But in the end, it was some of those other pressures. It was some of those other plays that helped put him over the top. Like Ja Joyner had a terrific game against Lincoln Riley's team.
I think that is the fourth or the fifth turnover that he has forced. And that's where defensive line stats, this like I do, are so misleading at times, right? Yeah, sacks are important, and that's what people look for, total tackles, whatever it may be. But I think in this day and age where I think the casual football fan is so much smarter than what they were 5-10 years ago, everybody can see the type of impact that 17 has on games.
Yeah.
And that's where I said coming into the season, I thought he was going to be a top 100 draft pick in the next NFL draft. I still think he's on that trajectory. You'd like to have him, be able to finish for some more sacks, maybe get 4 or 5 in these last 6 games, but his ability to disrupt games, how valuable it is to have such a good one-on-one edge rusher. It's one of the most valuable things you can have on a football team, and that's where, when they needed him most in that fourth quarter, he's the one that forces the interception. He's the one that forces that intentional grounding. He gets nothing on the stat sheet, to your point, but he's impacting games in a big way.
Well, and that's now you're right. The next transition is get those on the stat sheet. Like every year.
Pressures and hurries into sacks.
Pressures and hurries into sacks. Typically, and you follow this, whether you're following our favorite team or the Big Ten at large, but you notice how this transitions into the NFL draft. There's almost like this formula, at least what they'll put on TV for draft night. We're trying to, rank 100 players, and most of us haven't watched 98 of them. But it's for defensive line guys, it's always, you'll see, freshman year, he redshirts. So redshirt freshman year, he gets a sack and 20 tackles. And then it's into 3 sacks. It's into 5. And then this first rounder in the NFL draft suddenly jumps to 12 sacks and 19 and a half TFLs and things like that. So the measurables absolutely matter, but Ja Joyner mattered a ton with some of those hidden stats, the pressures, the hurries, impacting the game. What I was curious about with PJ, there were 2 instances, and I got a text from I think it's Chad in St. Paul on this, talking about the aggressiveness of this team versus maybe previous Fleck teams. And I was looking at 2 different spots that I mentioned a bit yesterday. Wanted your take on it. You can tell the third quarters are biting this team in the back end hard in 2024, right? Because the 7-minute drive, they get that touchdown, they go up 17-10, and PJ takes the timeout, and many people got many opinions on how this particular team uses timeouts in various spots. But I was actually really that was a clear PJ did not want to give up the ball in that spot. PJ's like, these third quarters are freaking avalanches. These are mudslides, and they're killing our team. We saw it against North Carolina. Iowa, probably the atopic example, where they just absolutely ended that game in 13 minutes, it felt like, against Iowa. But going forward, they ultimately still punt, but taking 6 minutes off the clock, keeping the possession there, the 4th and goal, and letting Max push that thing in there. Like that aggressive approach, I would agree. I've seen it more, I think, in 2024 than previous seasons.
Well, I think they finally figured out, or at least the head coach did, and this is just me hypothesizing, that going into that game and in that spot, you are a 2-3 football team going against the number 11 team in the country. You are who you are, and your record is what your record is, so you have to be aggressive in spots if you're going to be able to pull off the upset. And that's where USC's offense was moving the ball exponentially well between the 20s. And that's where they just happen to have 4 possessions end in Minnesota territory within their own 35, of which they got 0 points on because of 3 turnovers and a missed field goal. Now, like I do, that's not sustainable going forward into UCLA this weekend. But I think that's what the head coach finally figured out, or at least that was the game plan for him in his own mind, was I have to be aggressive. And that's where you mentioned on that third quarter drive that goes into the start of the fourth quarter, The Gophers have a 12-play offensive drive that ends in a punt, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, that's an unsuccessful drive. Well, you finally are able to start the second half at least, get your defense off the field, because your defense just allowed a 12-play touchdown drive in which USC never had a third down. That tells me USC had no issues whatsoever moving the football. Now, your offense stays on the field, lets your defense make some adjustments. You're able to flip field position. And then when you do get the ball back after that, your offense goes down and scores. I mean, your offense, I believe, had 8 drives against USC, never had a 3-and-out. That's very important in the context of this. And then you mentioned that final 4th and goal call where Fleck calls the timeout. You can see him hemming and hawing with offensive coordinator Greg Harbaugh. I think PJ made the correct decision that the play sequence for USC after that, if you would have just taken the points, and I know a lot of people wanted to take the points, but they were going to get the ball in the field goal range. You saw them do that very easily all game.
Yeah.
But if they have to then play for a touchdown, that's where that thing gets pear-shaped, and that's where then you can just throw your safeties 25 yards down the field, and the kid from Esco can go up and just grab it. And so I was all for it. Again, you have to take risks. If you are the underdog and you're playing the number 11 team in the country at home, and I'm glad that the head coach finally did it.
I dig it. The kid from Esco, as you say, Coy Parrish, they're on to something with this kid.
Sources tell me he might be a pretty good player.
He might be all right, huh?
Yeah, so, I think his stock is never going to be higher at this point. I mean, he's had a heck of a run out these last few weeks where he gets the interception in the non-conference, then you throw him out at the big house. He gets the 60-yard punt return to really help flip momentum in that fourth quarter, and then gets his helmet on a football to force a turnover, goes up, plays center field like Byron Buxton does, and goes and snatches that thing out of the air to end it. I mean, he is one of the most...
Wasn't it almost like exactly how Jordan Howden ended it against Penn State in 2019? Very similar, at least.
I mean, we've seen Howden do it. We've seen, I think, I'll go back to Antoine Winfield in a couple of spots, making those plays as an underclassman. But that's where he is the most, and I've been doing this now for over a decade covering this team. He's one of the most fearless freshmen I've ever seen, where anytime you watch him step out onto that field, he thinks he's the best player out there. And I know that he's one of us, but it's like he's a kid from Esco. I mean, it's not the biggest town in Minnesota. He didn't play a peace and love to Moose Lake and Duluth Denfield. I mean, you're not exactly playing the best of the best.
Hey, C.J. Ham went to Denfield.
Hey, Augustana zone, okay? We're all for that, but it's at no point as he's continued to go up, and that's where he was the All-American MVP. You know, the first few days of practice, I remember talking to guys that were down there. They were like, well, he's actually kind of struggling a little bit. But then as the day got, the days kind of went after one after one after, he got better and better. And then when the lights came on Saturday, he goes out, ends up winning the MVP, transitions over here to the University of Minnesota. And that was the most amount of defensive snaps he's ever played in a game. And now some of that was because Minnesota's starting safety went down. It looked like a concussion issue. We'll see if Coy gets his first start this weekend. We'll have to find out. But anytime they've added a little bit more to his plate, which is PJ's talked about it and I'm all for it, the worst thing, in my opinion, you can do is put too much on a kid's plate at this stage of his career.
Sure.
Now, Coy continues to finish his plate every week, so you're going to add a little bit more. But that kid just knows how to make plays. I mean, he has instincts, and he is just so fearless, which is something that's really fun to watch.
Mr. Brosmer through 6. What do we think of the experiment? I know the kid behind him it sounds like he's coming along nicely and people are excited about what he can do, but Brosmer will be done with Minnesota after the season. What do you think through 6?
I think he's probably the most under-talked about part of that win from Saturday night was Brosmer goes out and he completes, I think, 80% of his passes. Yeah, he's got the 3 rushing touchdowns. But he's able to navigate the offense. And that's where he and Harbaugh, you've seen this thing kind of develop where they still struggle to run the football. Now, they finally were able to get it going on Saturday night, which you hope you can then continue to do into this weekend at the Rose Bowl. But I think he's like a super game manager.
Okay.
Someone that he is incredibly smart. Someone that they can do checks at the line of scrimmage, which for a Gopher football offense, if you have been watching this thing for a long time, checks at the line of scrimmage is a 201, if not a 301 level event. And that's where Brosmer's intellect can really come into this. I think he's very accurate. I think he really takes care of the ball. And the biggest thing for this offense, truly, I think through 6 games and what we've seen between Brosmer and Greg Harbaugh and how this thing goes, is if they just don't shoot themselves in the foot, they can score 20-plus points in a given week with a lot of ease, in my opinion. It's just the offensive line has had 15 penalties. The offensive line has been inconsistent. Heading into last week's game, no Big Ten quarterback had more passes dropped than Max Brosmer. And so why do you beat USC? Why do you score 24 points? Your offensive line doesn't have any penalties. They played their most consistent game up front, and I can't remember any drops. So it turns out when you don't have the self-inflicted wounds, Nordo,
right,
Brosmer can complete 80% of his passes. If you don't turn over the football, which the Darius fumble at the end of the first half, that one, if they would have lost, would have been one I certainly would have been pointing to. Big point swing there, but self-inflicted wounds for this offense. They've really only had one, which was the fumble. And it turns out when you limit your own mistakes, you can be able to put up points.
In some ways, is this the recipe, the blueprint in some ways where Brosmer, I don't need him to throw what you get out of Darius Taylor on Saturday night, fumble aside, bounces back 200 total yards from him. You know, kind of the idea, okay, FCS, he leads the FCS in passing yards, he's going to come in. We're going to try and basically do a reboot of the 2019 with Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman, and we're going to air it out. It was like, no, I need a guy that's smart. I need a guy that can lead. I need a guy that doesn't make mistakes, and we're still going to hand it off 40 times a game.
I think in an ideal world, they would want to run more, but I also think that they know what the construct of this offense is. And I would love to see the offensive line be able to put it together 2 weeks in a row. PA has let me now use this consistently. The Minnesota Moving Company up front for your Golden Gopher team.
The college edition, yes.
The college edition. They have been very inconsistent, which has been very perplexing to me at times because they start 3 seniors. That's why Darius Taylor has struggled. But you even look at Darius's, now you mentioned it, 25 carries, but to me, more importantly, 5 catches.
Yeah.
I mean, he has over 20 catches already.
50-plus yards or something like that, too, as well, right?
Correct. And that's where he had 30 touches for 200 yards, and that's the most amount of touches he's had all season, which these are the type of games you want to save those massive workloads for. Darius Taylor isn't going to be a guy that you want to give 30 touches to every single week to win a football game.
That's why you have Major.
That's why you have Major. That's why you have some of the transfer backs that you have. But in a game like that, I think that was a big part of the fourth quarter comeback. Why does Minnesota score 14 points in the fourth quarter? Darius Taylor touches the ball 8 times, I believe, for 60 yards. And on 5 of those 8 touches, a first down was the result. Turns out when you keep your best players fresh into the fourth quarter, and then they can be able to move the offense for you, good things happen. But to be able to do that, you can't overload them in the early part of games. So I think they're figuring out more things as an offense. But when you turn into the UCLA game as the sun is setting over the mountains out there, that's going to be one of the things to watch against that UCLA team is, all right, Darius can get his 12 to 15 touches in the first half. But if we need him to grind this thing away like they did against USC, you better continue to spell in Major, who I also think played well on Saturday night.
To the text line, Bradshaw and Bryant, KFAN text line 64686. You know this. The state of Minnesota, very provincial, right? Mm-hmm. It's a one of us state. Sometimes it feels it's a one of us state. Brian from Duluth, Covenant Cleanup, Bernsey, Denfeld. Excuse me. Then I have Randy in Duluth. There is no I in Denfeld. That's Randy in Duluth.
Well, for our 2 Duluth guys,
and another 218. No, there's a third one. There's actually a total of 4 different people that have wanted to make sure you understand Duluth Denfeld.
Okay,
not Denfield.
You know, I've spent a lot of time.
It's an important distinction.
And I've spent a lot of time in Duluth in my life. And for those Duluth listeners up there, I want you to go see Russ at Marine General today. Go see if he can't give you a little bit of a discount. One of the most prolific stores in that beautiful town up there. Duluth Denfield. Denfeld. I got to get that right.
Well, earlier in the show, I just practiced on-air production meeting. Ogunbowale. See? I can say it. Dare Ogunbowale.
Nailed it.
Yeah, correct.
Your favorite Badger running back.
That's what this microphone is for sometimes, is learning how to say things.
Right.
And just do it on the fly, and the listeners are along for the ride.
Denfeld. Duluth listeners, I apologize.
Denfeld. Okay, perfect. Well, let's pause and bring it back to the college team. C.J. Ham rushing touchdown, by the way. That's why they're a little, I'm like, our guy got a rushing TD in London. Yep. Say the freaking school correctly.
Yep.
But when we come back, I do have one more thing on USC and kind of Big Ten at large, look ahead to UCLA. And just kind of, it's like you said, college football is weird. I'm still trying to get my head around new teams in the mix. Oregon's flying high. We don't have them on the schedule this year, but UCLA, new head coach, and they have some issues that they're trying to work through, but they got a home game at the Rose Bowl against our favorite team this weekend, so it'll be a fun one out west. You're going, of course, right?
I'll be out there. Oh, yeah.
How about that? Glitzy.
There'll be 15,000 Gopher fans out there this weekend. That's my bold prediction.
I mean, you used to love just going to South Bend or Lafayette or...
Yeah, I can't wait to go to Champaign and Newark, New Jersey in a few weeks. I think this was probably one we've had circled on the schedule for a while.
Is Rutgers in Newark?
You fly into Newark, it's in Piscataway.
Piscataway,
I know
yeah.
You've spent a lot of time there. I think Max...
the only time I had Punxsutawney.
Oh, boy.
And I knew that's not correct.
No, that's in Pennsylvania. That's Punxsutawney Phil.
Wow, we're all learning a lot today.
Denfeld.
Max has got a cash-winning opportunity for you, the listener. And when we return, we'll continue talking with Ryan Burns, Gopher Illustrated on The Fan.
The Fan and Two Men in a Truck want to give you a shot to put $1,000 in your hand with our national cash contest. Enter the keyword cash. That's easy to pronounce at KFAN.com now for your shot at winning. That's keyword cash. Enter it now at KFAN.com.
Fan.
Stick around following every noon Vikings game this season for Vikings Overtime, hosted by Paul Meat Sauce Lambert alongside myself and Robbie Rosenhaus, presented by Park Chrysler Jeep in Burnsville. Catch them all right here on KFAN and on the free iHeartRadio app.
So you've gotten Ryan Burns, Gopher Illustrated, in studio. You've got 6 weeks under your belt, just kind of getting your head around Big Ten, and it's UCLA, and it's USC, and then Oregon. Again, Oregon and Washington not on our schedule this year. I assume they will be next. But who is there an adjustment that you think takes place over the next few years? And it was something that popped in my head as I'm thinking about USC in town. And you can joke about, whether it's the Big 12 that never played defense or it's Pac-12 after dark. In some ways, you didn't see a lot of defense maybe on the West Coast either. Mm-hmm. But now they're in the Big 10 and the Lincoln Rileys of the world and everybody, they're starting to figure out, like, this is what works. This is what is winning in Big 10. And the Big 10 schedule now, for the most part, really just kind of 3 or 4 weeks old versus with the non-conference on the front end. But who do you think adjusts more? Is it the new guys to the mix, and that's just obvious that what they will be seeing specifically, whether it's the mountainous offensive lines in Wisconsin, it's that Michigan defense where half the team freaking goes pro. It's really the all around that is Ohio State right now. Those sorts of things. Penn State. I mean, Franklin. They're not getting over the hump, but that's a playoff team, right? In college football, the Nittany Lions are. What kind of adjustment do you think that is ahead, maybe for even the Oregons of the world that are currently at the top of the heap, but things are going to get tougher for them down the road?
I think for West Coast teams like Oregon, like USC, I think the biggest area they're going to have to continue to improve is in the trenches, because especially as we're going to get into the back half of the season now for everyone, it's how long can you hold up? Yeah. If you have some depth issues, you're going to get exposed in late October, November, especially as it becomes. Well, now we'll see. I mean, I even think about this USC game when it got put on the schedule, okay? Early October, a lot of people are thinking, boy, what if we get one of them nor'easters that comes down? It's going to be cold. Them Southern California boys aren't going to want to play in it. And then you think about last Saturday night, it's like 76 degrees. But I think for them, it's just loading up in the trenches, making sure you have enough big bodies to go against what these Big Ten teams have been recruiting for year after year after year. And now that's where places like USC and Oregon, they can just go to the portal and buy. Or they can go to the high school and buy.
So this isn't like a 5-year reclamation project, unfortunately. They can just load up.
Well, I can tell you, Oregon and USC, they're not hurting in the NIL department. Contrary to what they may say or what their fans may say, they are two of the best NILs out there. I know what they have roughly spent in the millions. And that's even where in Ohio State. I think Gene Smith, their athletic director.
Well, Caleb had a pretty nice apartment his final year at.
Caleb Williams was making multi-millions of dollars out there. And so I don't think he was hurting for anything.
No, he was not.
But even, you mentioned Ohio State, one of the best teams in the country.
Can we get Woody Marks a car?
I don't think Woody Marks is hurting for. I don't think any of those guys, Miller Moss, Woody Marks, Eric Gentry, whoever you want to name for a USC Trojan, I don't think they're hurting for anything out there. Or even Oregon, you mentioned them. I mean, they got Phil Knight money out there. They can go buy whatever they need to. So that's where I think for the West Coast teams, it's the trenches. But for the rest of the Big Ten, I think they have to get more athletic and more speed.
Okay.
Because that's one of the biggest areas I noticed, at least USC versus Minnesota. I mean, they have some of the best skill possession players in the country.
Everybody's fast.
And everybody looks 6'2 plus with incredibly long arms, very twitched up. And so I think the rest of the Big Ten's got to get more twitched and more speed. But for those West Coast teams, now I want to see what it looks like from Game 7 to Game 12, where your depth's going to be more tested, especially up front.
A couple more for you here, and just kind of focusing on moving forward. So this was a massive win, and we saw a fan base on the field after the victory, a fan base, as I've put it over the last 24 hours, this fan base is thirsty for wins like this. And again, building up the idea of what beating a USC looks like and feels like, even if that's not going to be a top 5 team in the country at the end of this thing. It was a big deal. Fans are pumped for it. They need these wins. PJ needs these victories. I think that's pretty clear as well. Mm-hmm. But how are you, now projecting forward? Fairly nice schedule really down the stretch here, save for, you got to go beat Bielema. I think that's at Illinois. Is that accurate?
And Brett Bielema has never lost to the University of Minnesota. Plus, then you get Penn State at home, which
Penn State.
We'll see what they're like. Yep.
So a couple tough ones. But other than that, just moving forward, UCLA, new coach, they're a team and a program in transition, but they have a right to win a game at the Rose Bowl. Like, is this a letdown type of thing? Like emotional high into just devastating butt-kicking low a week later? Can we really lose to I think they're 1-4?
They are 1-4.
Can we lose to a 1-4 team after storming the field? That feels like it's illegal. That can't happen.
They're certainly liable to, and that's where part of why they're 3-3 and why they're not 5-1 or 6-0 is this was the first time they've played their closest version of 60 minutes of complete football. They didn't have a 10-minute stretch like they did, say, against Michigan, where it's turnover, immediate touchdown, block punt, immediate touchdown, you're down 14 points, and now you spend the rest of the game trying to dig out of it, or the third quarter against Iowa, or the sloppiness that was the North Carolina game.
Yeah.
If you can just play 60 minutes of football, and I still think that version that we saw against USC, they have so much more left to go where they can play so much better. The question is,
I'm glad you mentioned that. They didn't go out of body on Saturday against USC. They just didn't give as you said it actually, and you nailed it, is, not making mistakes and not giving the ball away, even though Darius did that in the first half. But it's like they didn't go out of body. There was no miraculousness to the operation. It was just solid. They played a solid football game on Saturday and beat a helmet school. And they got to go do it again now.
And I think they're a good football team. They just haven't played really good football. They have played inconsistent football. They've played self-sabotaging football that has put them behind, where they can play well for 45 minutes, and they had through the first 5 games in spots.
Yeah.
And then they would self-sabotage themselves, and then they couldn't get out of it. And so what changed against USC, to your point? They played in like a 70-75% percentile. They just didn't shoot themselves in the foot. Their defense had some of the most timely turnovers you'll ever see in a football game, which is how I mentioned it earlier. USC has 4 possessions within the Minnesota 35, 0 points on them. And that's ultimately how big part of why you win the game. But if they can just be consistent, and that's what I'm sure in about 20 minutes here, PJ Fleck will be talking about Guardsy and Grimm, is if they're going to beat UCLA this weekend in the Rose Bowl, which I think, in my opinion, there's going to be more Gopher fans than there are UCLA fans there, partly because of UCLA's performance, partly because Gopher fans haven't been to the Rose Bowl in 50 years. But if they're going to beat UCLA, which...
Way to bring that up. Tough subject.
Yeah, 65% chance of winning, say. Like, you just have to play consistent football. You just can't shoot yourselves in the foot. And God forbid you actually play really well in a game.
Yeah.
Like, you put it together for 60 full minutes where the offense is complementing the defense and the special teams doesn't kill you. I mean, you're going to be in a pretty good spot. So that's where you look at the next 6 games on the schedule. You're 3-3 right now. I would imagine going forward, now you're, I think, 5-point favorites this weekend on the road. Then you get a bye week. Then you get Maryland and Illinois and Rutgers, and that's going to be a huge stretch for them where, in my opinion, they got to go 2-1 at the very least, because then you get another bye week before Penn State comes to town, and then you get the Dairy Raid and the Wisconsin Badgers on Black Friday at 11 a.m. But if they can just stack back-to-back weeks with consistent football, I think you're going to then find you can win back-to-back Big Ten football games that way, Nordo.
It's kind of weird in LA too. When things aren't good, people don't go. I mean, even when the Rams are good and winning games in the NFL, and admittedly, I'm not tracking attendance of USC or UCLA football games.
You're an elite college football mind. Come on now.
But when the Vikings go to SoFi on a Thursday night, there's going to be a massive Vikings contingent.
Right.
The Packers, all the cheeseheads, and the seats weren't wide enough for most of the Packers fans, but the contingent of Packers fans at SoFi is massive. When the Niners go down there, it's a freaking sea of red. Mm-hmm. California is just too cool. There's too much fun stuff to do. It's the beach. It's paradise.
Especially in LA. Everybody thinks they might be a little bit too cool for football, or maybe even the weather. I looked at it, considering.
Or if you live 5 miles away, it's a 2-hour drive.
Yeah, I can't wait to go from LAX in an Uber to Pasadena. That won't take me an hour and a half, I'm sure.
That's a business expense.
That's a business decision, too, to be able to try to do an Uber that way, but.
Well, it's good, man. Enjoy the trip out there. Yeah, this team needs these wins. These teams, and it lines up. You can't storm the field and lose to UCLA. That cannot happen. Put 40 on those Bruins and get that victory. That's cool, man. Have a blast out there. Gopher Illustrated. It's Gopher singular.
Yep.
Illustrated.com. GopherIllustrated.com. And you can follow him. Pair and a Spare.
Yeah.
Where do we do the podcast? It's you, Guardsy, and Chip.
Me, Guardsy here from KFAN. You got Chip Scoggins from the Star Tribune. We'll actually be out there. All three of us will be out there on Friday. I think we're going to be at Beanie's Beanery. I think it's one of the U of M sponsored social things. We're going to go out there, talk to everybody, say hi.
In Pasadena?
In Pasadena.
There's a place called Beanie's Beanery.
Yeah, it's quite the alliteration there.
Okay.
As far as I know, the beverages are still cold there, even though it sounds like a coffee shop.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be out in the Pasadena area, you're going to be traveling out with some buddies or some family members, and you're going to be in Pasadena, come say hi to us.
Do they have food there?
I believe so.
So it could have been, Beanie's Beanery.
Hey,
it could have been Beanie's.
I didn't pick it.
Bistro. That'd be better alliterative than just Beanie's Bean-Filled Beanery.
Well, many people
pot.
say you're one of the marketing geniuses here at the radio station.
No one's ever said that.
I think Max has told me that multiple times, so I think you have to go have a talk with.
That was off the record.
Well, that's my fault now. I feel a little bit embarrassed, but.
Well, wherever, Beanie's Beanery.
In Pasadena, yeah. So if you're out there.
But you're not going there. You'll go for the beans. You'll stay for the Pair and a Spare.
You stay to ask Chip Scoggins if his phone is at 100% and to tell Guardsy how good of a job he does. And then you look at me and say, boy, you do have a face for radio and a body for podcasting. That's what I'm here for.
Well, us millennials, we need affirmation. That is a very, very big part of our existence. Warm fuzzies, always appreciated. Follow Ryan Burns at Ryan Burns, MN on the X Machine. Pair and a Spare podcast, GopherIllustrated.com. Final segment, 9 to noon around the corner. We got covenant cleanups. This is why the listeners are the best.
They're always on it.
First of all, it's Barney's Beanery in Pasadena. So if you're going to be, it's not Beanie's Beanery.
It's a little bit better.
There's a reason I thought that was ridiculous,
right.
And it's because it is. Barney's Beanery in Pasadena, a few of them in the L.A. area, courtesy of the 651. Thank you, Mike in Fergus Falls. Nor'easter in Minnesota. Denfield. Where is this guy from? It's a very good question, Mike. He's from Oakdale, Minnesota. Things we learned today. Thank you to Charch for joining right out of the gates. Just so much steam on this 5-0 Vikings team into the bye. An imperfect operation on Sunday in London, but ultimately the perfect record. This team is still trailed like 3.5 total minutes. And we're kind of entering that point now. We're out of the bye. It doesn't get easy. It's a Sunday nooner at US Bank Stadium, and the kiddies are in town. So we want that victory. It's going to be what a fun, massive game to come back to after the bye. Looking forward to that. But Sam Darnold at one point, just don't screw up, don't give away the game, Sam, and you're a placeholder until J.J. McCarthy shows up. And now it's getting to the point where we're talking about: has there been a regression? Is he cooling off, as Charch was talking about? that's kind of how our perspectives have changed through the first 5 weeks of the season. And looking for Sam maybe to get healthy, how much that hit he took during that game against the Jets impacted his ability to make plays for the rest of the game. We shall see. How about that knee? Did that knee against the Texans matter in totality over the next couple of weeks? So kind of the idea is if you're sore, it's time to get right. And we'll be watching. We'll be on Aaron Jones' watch and probably won't hear anything until the beginning of next week. Not a lot of access where our Vikings shows and stuff. They're all taking a break this week, and we'll return. We're going to be at TCO next Monday, so we're going to get to hear from the head coach. Just so many fun things around the corner, but from it might be 2-3 into the bye to being 5-0 is sweet. Thank you to Lavelle for coming in studio. Sorry about the elevator situation. I'm glad he rolled with that, by the way. I mean,
yeah, he really did.
He was kind of excited. And I think it was all because he wanted to tell his story about when he was actually stuck in the elevator.
I was just about to say.
And the only thing he cared about, which, by the way, I mean, I've been stuck in an elevator. Luckily, one time it was with 2 other people. Another time it was just by myself.
Oh.
But that's a great...
That's a lot better than having to be full, yeah.
Yeah, and Lavelle, I mean... he said like 6 or 8 people in an elevator where you're already trying to invade, like you want to avoid people's breath,
right?
Like invading your space. Talk about claustrophobia, and all he cares about is asking Gardy a question in a postgame. A man that is career focused. There's no doubt about that.
I would have turned into the Hunger Games if I was up in there.
Yeah, somebody's not making it out of there. There's no doubt. And like Sauce talking about Edward 40 hands this morning, somebody's immediately going to have to go to the bathroom.
1,000%.
You got to pick a corner.
Move.
You got to right. And everybody put your vote. Somebody. That's unsightly. And thanks to Bernsey for joining Oakdale's finest. Thank you, Max, for hanging out with me today. I'm in for PA tomorrow as well. We will have a border battle with Mr. Sinekin, some NFL, some Howell in the mix. That's during the final hour. Peter Carline of The Athletic, but London style. He wrote a piece in The Athletic on PA, followed him around London. What an adventure that must have been. Well, he's going to join me around 10. Looking forward to hopefully having Florio in the mix. And the Minnesota Wild, we might mix some hockey in as well because their season openers on Thursday at the X. Looking forward to that. Thank you for listening to The Fan. More Gopher football around the corner. PJ Fleck, Gopher Football Weekly, is next on The Fan.
Podcast today's Paul Allen Show, or listen back to previous show and interviews by going to the iHeartRadio app or KFAN.com.